So you're curious about learning how to play Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Well, I know that the game can look pretty intimidating from the outside, so hopefully this video is going to help you become more comfortable with the rules and what it looks like to actually play a game of Age of Sigmar. If you've already bought your models but haven't played a game yet, then this video will also be very useful for you so that you can get an introductory glance at all of the different phases, how we set up a game, how we score a game, etc. And if you keep an eye on this channel, we will be doing future videos that cover all sorts of specific rules interactions and more detailed looks at each phase of the game, as well as introductory content for every faction in the game. So with all of that said, let's take a look at how to play Warhammer Age of Sigmar. We'll start by talking about how you can set up a game of Age of Sigmar and what army composition looks like. The first thing you and your opponent need to do is to decide on a points limit. This limit will determine how many models you can bring in your army, as each model has a points value assigned to it. A 1,000 point game will take approximately 1 to 2 hours and is played on a 30 by 44 inch table size. Keep in mind that in Age of Sigmar, it is balanced for 2,000 point games, so a 1,000 point game can be a little bit swingy, but they're still good for new players to get started on playing and learning the rules before they have 2,000 points of models bought and assembled. A 2,000 point game will take 2+ hours and is played on a 44 by 60 inch table size. This is the standard for your typical Age of Sigmar game. After sorting out your points limits, you will pick a faction to play as. Then you'll set up your army into regiments, and for this you'll need to take a look at your faction's battle profile document to see how many points your units are worth. Remember, you need to be under your points limit. The battle profile documents are free online on the Warhammer community site, so you can go check it out now. You will also need to follow the army building rules for 4th edition Age of Sigmar. Pick one hero in your army to be your general and put 0 to 4 units in that general's regiment. You can also take up to 4 more regiments, each consisting of a hero plus 0 to 3 units. Specific heroes can take specific units, so make sure you check your faction battle profile to make sure that your army is legal. The next step is to select your battle formation, your enhancements, and your spell, prayer, or manifestation lores available to your faction. Currently, most factions only have access to a single lore for magic and prayers, so there is not really a choice here to make. But manifestations have many lores, and you can take whichever one looks coolest to you. You will also want to have access to all of your unit's war scrolls. These sheets have all of the stats and the rules for your models. Currently, they are all available for free as PDFs on the Warhammer community page and on the official app. Finally, you and your opponent pick a mission to play and set up the table with objectives and terrain accordingly. The mission will have a map that shows where the objectives go and will lay out any special rules and how scoring will work. Now we can move on to the actual game, starting with deployment. To start a match, both players will roll a dice, and the winner will choose to be the attacker or the defender. The defender gets to set up the terrain on the table, and the attacker picks which side is their territory, and begins deploying their army first. The attacker deploys 1 regiment of units, and then the defender deploys 1 regiment, and so forth. Whichever player finishes deploying their regiments first gets to pick if they take the first or second turn in the first battle round of the match. After deployment is complete, we can move on to the start of the first battle round. At the start of the battle round, each player may need to activate or select specific faction abilities to be in effect. Both players also get 4 command points to use command abilities. These points expire at the end of the battle round, so don't forget to use them. The underdog is also determined at this point, and special map rules may grant them a boost. Whichever player has less victory points is the underdog. In the first round, there is no underdog. A battle round consists of both players taking a turn. Let's start with the first player's turn. At the start of the turn, the active player picks a battle tactic to complete, and if they are successful, they will earn 4 victory points. Battle tactics contain specific instructions to slay certain models or to move your units into specific areas of the map. Next is the hero phase. In the hero phase, the active player will use any abilities that are meant to be activated in this phase. Abilities are color-coded, so it's easy to remember which ones to activate in which phases. The hero phase also includes casting spells and chanting prayers. You can also rally units that are not in combat with a command point and return slain models or heal their models' health. Casting a spell in the hero phase requires the player to control a unit with the wizard keyword. After selecting a spell to cast, the player then makes a 2d6 dice roll which must meet the casting value required for the spell. The opposing player then has a chance to unbind the spell by rolling higher than them, canceling the spell entirely. They can only do this if they have a wizard within 30 inches of the caster. Prayers can be used by any unit with the priest keyword. Unlike spells, prayers cannot be unbound. A prayer requires chanting a roll of d6, which must meet the value listed on the prayer ability. Prayers also have a ritual point system and powered up versions of each prayer, but we won't go that deep in this video. At the end of the hero phase, the non-active player can use a command point to attempt to cast a spell or chant a prayer of their own with a -1 penalty to the roll. Now let's talk about the movement phase. In the movement phase, the active player moves their units around the table. They can use a move, run, or retreat action. The move action uses whatever movement characteristic is listed on a unit's war scroll. Running lets you add a d6-inch move to your regular move, but then you cannot use a shoot or charge ability later with that unit. Retreating is only used when escaping melee combat. The retreating unit will take d3 damage as they escape. They also cannot shoot or charge later in the turn, but they can make a move equal to their movement characteristic. The move, run, and retreat abilities do not allow you to enter the 3-inch combat range of enemy units. In order to get into combat, you'll need to use a charge during the charge phase. At the end of the movement phase, the non-active player can spend a command point to redeploy one of their units and move them d6 inches. This can be a handy trick to make their opponent's charges harder, or just to keep a unit safe altogether. In the shooting phase, the active player will shoot with all of their units that have ranged attacks. They will need to measure their range distance in inches from the base of each model in the shooting unit to the nearest base of the unit that they want to shoot at. If an individual model isn't in range of the enemy, they won't be able to shoot. I'll explain how attacks work later in this video, so we're going to leave it at that for now. Remember that you can't shoot with a unit if you use the run or retreat ability in the movement phase. At the end of the shooting phase, the non-active player has the chance to shoot with one of their units with a -1 penalty to their hit roll for the price of 1 command point. One more thing about shooting. Once a unit is within the melee combat range of another unit, they can no longer use shooting attacks during the shooting phase unless their shooting ranged weapon specifically has the shoot in combat keyword. In the charge phase, the active player charges with any of their units that did not run or retreat in the movement phase. To execute a charge ability, the active player makes a charge roll of 2d6. Then they can move the unit the amount in inches that was rolled on that charge roll. The charge must end within half of an inch of an enemy unit. If this is not possible, the charge fails and no movement takes place. Aside from piling in during combat or special abilities, charging is the only way to get into combat range of enemy units, since the move, run, and retreat do not allow you to enter the 3-inch combat range of enemy units. At the end of the charge phase, the non-active player can spend 2 command points to countercharge with one of their units. This follows the same rules that we just laid out. Next, we'll talk about the combat phase. To start the combat phase, both players use any combat phase abilities starting with the active player. These abilities are often listed on each unit's war scroll, but you may also have faction abilities that happen at the start of this phase. Next, each player takes turns picking a unit to fight with. Units can only fight if an enemy unit is within their 3-inch combat range. This is measured per model, so if you have any models that are not within 3 inches of an enemy, they cannot attack. In this case, their unit may be in combat, but that particular model is not in range to make an attack. Units with the strike first keyword will fight before any other units. Units with the strike last keyword must wait until all other units have fought before they are selected. In both cases, the active player has priority if both players have a unit with strike first or with strike last. When a player chooses to use a fight ability, they also get to make a 3-inch pile-in move with that unit. This will allow their models to get closer to the enemy and possibly wrap around them, get onto another objective, or even drag another enemy unit into combat. Once all units have fought, the phase is over. Let's take a look at how attacking works in Age of Sigmar. When a unit attacks in combat, you'll use all of the weapons listed on their war scroll under melee weapons unless otherwise indicated. You cannot use ranged weapons in the combat phase. First, you make a hit roll. This must equal or exceed the hit value on the weapon profile for that war scroll. So for example, on the Free Guild Cavalier war scroll, they have a 4+ to hit. This means that you would need to roll a 4, a 5, or a 6 to hit. A unit of cavaliers has 5 models, each of them has 3 attacks, and the unit has the champion keyword, so you add 1 extra attack. This means that when you use the fight ability with the cavaliers, you would roll 16 dice at once, and keep note of all the 4s, 5s, and 6s that you get. Those are all hits. Then you make a wound roll. This must equal or exceed the wound value on your war scroll. Looking back to our specific example of cavaliers, if we had 6 dice rolls that were +4+ to hit, we would then roll those 6 dice again to see if they are 4+ to wound. At this point, we know how many attacks are coming at our opponent, and our opponent must make that number of save rolls. If they meet or exceed their save characteristic on their unit's war scroll, then no damage is dealt from the attack. For example, if the 4 attacks cleared the 2 hit and 2 wound rolls, then the opponent would make 4 save rolls. However, the attacking unit's rend characteristic is subtracted from the defending player's save roll. For example, if a unit has a 3+ save, but their opponent has a -2 rend, then the defending player will need to roll a 5+ to save the attack. Finally, some units may have a ward keyword with a number in brackets. If a unit has a ward keyword, then they get to roll a dice for every individual point of damage that they take. For each roll that meets or exceeds the ward value, that point of damage is cancelled. There is an illustrated example of this in the 4th edition rules. This rules PDF is free on Warhammer Community, so you can go check it out there, and in the future I plan to do some focused videos on combat as well. Now we'll talk about end phase abilities and scoring. At the end of the turn, players activate any end of turn abilities starting with the active player. Then the active player tallies their score for the round. They will receive 2 points for controlling 1 objective, 2 points for a second objective, and 2 points if they control more objectives than their opponent does. Objectives are round 40mm markers, and your models will contest an objective if they are within 3 inches of that marker. Each unit has a control score, so for example, the Free Guild Steel Helms have a control value of 1. This means that each unit counts as 1 control value if they are within 3 inches of the objective marker. At the end of the turn, both players count up how many models they have on each objective and what their total control scores are. Whoever has the higher control value will control that particular objective. Players will also receive 4 points if they were able to complete a battle tactic that turn. Note that the non-active player does not score on their opponent's turn. At this point, it is the next player's turn. All the same phases will occur, but the second player is now the active player, and the player that just had their turn is the non-active player. After both players have taken a turn, they each roll a dice, and the player with the higher roll decides whether to go first or second in the next battle round. If a player decides to go first but they just had the last turn, this means that they would take 2 turns in a row. This is called the double turn, and if a player willingly takes a double turn, they cannot score a battle tactic for that round. If the roll-off is a tie, then the player that went first in the last round gets to pick whether to go first or second. The player with less points will become the underdog and will get an extra command point. The specific mission may have other bonuses for the underdog. Otherwise, the game continues with both players getting a fresh set of 4 command points, and again, the underdog gets that bonus 5th command point. There are 4 total battle rounds in the core book battle plans, but some maps may play 5 battle rounds. Alright, that's it. You now know the basics of how to play Warhammer Age of Sigmar 4th edition. Obviously, there are some in-depth rules that we didn't cover in this video, but if you are thinking about joining the hobby, you might have a better idea of whether this type of gameplay would appeal to you or not. And if you already have your miniatures, then hopefully this is going to help you get started on your very first match. One of the most important things that you can do if you're starting Age of Sigmar is to be prepared. Remember to bring all of the faction information for your faction, the war scrolls, the battle profiles, etc. Creating a cheat sheet with what to do in each phase will also be a very handy thing that will smooth over the very first game that you play to make the play experience relatively painless. Otherwise, stay tuned on this channel for more content like this. I'm hoping to do in-depth videos in the future of each phase of the game. And I'm also going to be working on some faction-specific primers to help people learn about each of the factions and which ones they might want to play in the future. Thanks for watching, and if you liked this video, if it was useful for you, then please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much, and we'll see you all soon in another video.